Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Dickinson, host of the CELO's Message podcast, coming to you from Red Bluff Park in California. Today, we welcome back Isabel Torres Carrillo, who is talking about the second part of her contribution on CELO's Message, all about the experience. So, welcome, Isa. It's lovely to have you back again.
Thank you for having me.
I got all my notes here, all kinds of stuff, all 10,000 questions. So I'm just going to dive in if that's okay.
Okay, but I'm intimidated. I'm not sure.
So in the experience, I'll just read the introduction again so everybody can see how you started it. Over the years, I have sometimes experienced a different way of being in the world that I will call connection with the meaning of life. My consciousness expands. I feel connected. I experience reality in a new way, less conditioned by the limits of space and time. This has happened during each of the 8 ceremonies that form this part of the book. I was able to connect with them deeply, one after the other, until I finally identified with all of them. And that's what I got curious about because, to be honest, this is the part of the book that I neglect the most, and I don't get past the well-being and the service usually. I never think of going and looking at the others, and it seemed like you went through them a little bit more methodically. So I was wondering where you were when this experience happened. The way you put it was, I was able to connect with them deeply, one after the other. So it seemed like I don't know if you went through them one by one, just reading them in the book. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So actually, no, that wasn't how it happened. I wanted to write comments to the message, and the point of view I chose was, what are the difficulties? What have I understood? Because I also thought it's not fair after so many years. It's not true that I don't have any experience, but I don't have this experience that I envisioned. Like, I wake up every day and I'm so lucid, and I'm always kind, and I'm always realizing who I have in front of me. So I was trying to figure out, where am I? Where am I going? And so when I got to this part, I think this part is actually more of my reflection on an accumulation of experiences.
Okay. Yes.
Because while I was having them, I wasn't really, I was kind of like thrust in them, it wasn't something, I wasn't going about it methodically. But when I came to this part, I started asking myself, so what is it about these experiences? What is the underlying theme? And it didn't happen in a linear way.
No. And I don't think I'd ever really asked myself that question. I just did them like we used to do them in church. You show up and you sit in the pew and close your eyes and
Exactly.
And I sort of have my favorites and the ones I don't like at all. So I thought I'd better just go and see what CELO said about them. So I looked in his commentaries on the message, and then I realized, oh, I completely ignored this part of his writing. I never go there. I just go in the first part of the book.
Exactly.
And he says they're all about 2 realities, immortality and the sacred, and the right to believe or not to believe in them. And then they sort of help you confront your life, which is what you were talking about, that just, about waking up each morning is like a confrontation with life we get every day. How's it going to go? But then, and I always forget about this, he talks about censorship and self-censorship in that context, right?
Yes.
So I'd love to hear any thoughts you have about that, the immortality and the sacred, censorship and self-censorship.
Okay, so for me, what is the thing with the experiences? Kind of like going back to what we were talking about last week, it's this thing of intersubjectivity. Like,
Yes.
at the base of this is that you are not an isolated cell floating in a meaningless existence. And so the other is necessary. There is no meaning, there is no transcendence, there is no sacred without the other. And so I think that is the most important thing of the experience, because in the experience, at least for me, when I connect with the other person deeply, with the other person, with the other intention, it doesn't even have to be, a flesh and blood person in front of me. That is God. For me, that is like the element of the meaning of reality. And it's funny that something that should be so easy is actually so hard, which kind of like plays into the aspect of illusion. But what happens with the ceremonies is I had exactly the same difficulty that you had, that since I was brought up in a religious family, it was more of an external commitment, something that I would do, but not necessarily put my heart into it.
Yes.
But I think that is the interesting thing about repeating them, because that's what happened, that I was in many protection ceremonies, and then once, when one of them, I was like, ah, life is sacred. We are here because life is sacred. It's not that we're here because we're committing to supporting materially the child, which of course we would be.
Yes.
But life is sacred, and we are a community. We are saying we as a community. But I'm not saying that there are ceremonies that are better than others. It's just that there's like a right moment for each of us. So all of a sudden, it's the times that it has happened has been exactly like that. I'm doing something, and then all of a sudden, it's like this reality opens and it becomes so full of volume. And also, I feel like the past and the future are connected. I feel life has always been sacred. In how many places and in how many moments have we celebrated this life, and we will continue doing it. And those moments, those are the best.
Yes. Do you happen to remember where you were when you had that experience with the protection?
Yes, I was in Punta de Vacas. And it was really interesting because he also talks about free interpretation and free organization, which is
Right.
so important for this thing, I think, to come up. Because what happened was that after this protection, for some reason, the people in the hall started expressing out loud their wishes for these children. And it was so beautiful, Ken. I mean, we were all crying, and I didn't know any of the children, or maybe, but it was so, I could feel, how all these people, how desperately they wanted these children to grow and to be safe and to be happy. And it was so beautiful. And not that in the other moments I wasn't moved, but in that moment, I felt this connection with the past and with the future and with
Yes.
people.
Well, have you done, a lot of work in the hall or halls with these experiences? Because in Red Bluff, we just got the hall, the form at least is there. The outside looks like a hall. And we did some ceremonies in there for the first time this past weekend. We were all at Red Bluff Park. And there's no going back anywhere else. Once you've had the experience in the hall with the ceremony, you feel like, wow, I can't do it anywhere else. Anywhere else is going to be second best to this because it was such a wonderful, it was so profound and sacred and wonderful that people did not want to leave the hall. We just sat there for a long time, just being with each other. So,
Yes, but I think it's both, because I think that you are right in Red Bluff, you have a very special human ambit. For me, that is the same. Once you have
yes,
that, the fact that there is a hall, and the hall has so many meanings, the fact that you're contained in the sphere that allows you to, in reality, to connect with what's inside of you, because it's empty, but also connect with other person. There are no angles, there's nothing sharp, everything is kind of expansive. And also it's not related to anything with the past, so it also leaves you like this fresh slate towards the future. But I think that in your case it's both of them. I don't think that the hall by itself,
no,
but
it's,
the two, yes, the
yes,
two, that is a
yeah.
powerful thing.
yeah, people were saying, there's no going back. We can't do this in the multi-use room anymore. We got to come over
No.
here to do it.
Yes, yes,
Or go outside.
yes.
Well, I wondered if I've struggled with the censorship and self-censorship for a long time. About what does that really mean? And he talks about this in relation to the ceremonies here. And so more and more, I feel like, are you self-censoring yourself regarding immortality and the sacred, the right to believe in it? That I don't know if you've thought about it in that way at all.
Well, for me, first, I'd like to reach out to David Roberts
Yes,
because he wrote this
yes,
letter to CeeLo, which is still for me one of my milestones, that the only way to this deep and internal change, which was what we were talking about, that in the beginning
yes,
that we really want to change, is to overcome censorship and self-censorship and deepen in the works of the message, which was also one of the reasons. So, all our intentions are kind of entwined and they form this current that you're traveling in. And for me, actually, the censorship and self-censorship has to do with the affection. And that is the thing that must be, for me, that was the thing that I have to take care of and protect. Because when I feel the affection is not blocked by space and time. Somebody dies and I still love them. But
yes.
to believe that that love is what is actually real and the other things are not so real, that is, I think, the thing to overcome, because we are living in a moment where we cannot connect to this affection for ourselves, for the others, for the planet. And I think that for me, the core of the matter is the affection.
Lovely. I have a little anecdote, about that letter to David because at that time, Mary Hobie was in Manantiales, and then she sent me this news of that conversation with CeeLo. And I went to Sacramento. I drove there and I met with David Roberts. It was in this little side alley in a cafe. And I reproduced it as we used to do in the old days. You drive somewhere and have a coffee, and now we do it all electronically. And he was absolutely shocked, out of his mind. And he said, "This changes everything for me. I have to go home and I got to go home and write to CeeLo about this, because I'm putting everything on hold." And then he wrote that letter.
I think that letter is definitely a reference. And then it was funny because I had never heard of David Roberts. And then when I came to California, I didn't meet him. And I really wanted to, I don't know, I was very curious about him. And then finally, in one of these book readings, he participated. And I was so happy to, because it's these people have a profound effect on your life and you don't even know what they look like,
Right, right. Yes.
So I
Yeah, no,
really
he
enjoyed meeting him. I mean, even if virtually, I found him to be such a sensitive,
is very
young
sensitive
person.
and a character on top of it.
Yes,
Well, again, going back to these 8 ceremonies, it seems the first 4 are all connected in one way or another, as CeeLo says in his commentaries, with the Force. And I had a little bit of a struggle connecting the protection with the Force until you just described it the way you did, right? And it seems like for you, you got this illumination about the protection ceremony in one moment, in this much bigger meaning there. And those are the ones that I tend to stay with. And the well-being, that all has all to do with the affection that you're
yes,
describing, I think.
yes.
And the others, again, I'll be honest about it, some of them I bounce right off.
Which ones?
Like the marriage one had very little poetry in it for me. And how do you feel about that one?
It's the same. That was the last one because the protection and the marriage were the ones that I had more problems with, maybe because I don't have children, so I
Yes.
was always kind of feeling out of place, that I couldn't really connect to what was happening as an experience. And also, I was never married. But it was incredible because I have to say, this one also happened to me in Punta de Vacas. But a friend of mine, it was his marriage ceremony, and he started the marriage ceremony saying, "This is the end of a very long journey," something like that. But as he was talking, like I could, like now I describe these things, but it's not like it's the movies inside my head, but it is really kind of moments of trains of images that kind of unleash. And all
Yes.
of a sudden, I see my friend's life because I know him for 30 years. And I see all his struggles and every time he fell and that he picked himself back up. Because why should you share with the community that you're being married? Why should other people care? But actually, it is a moment of maturity. It's like a moment
Yeah.
when something changes in you. That's what you're sharing with the community. And this change has to do with the fact that you are able to relate to another person in a different way, in a more giving, a more caring, a more mature way. And so, of course, I cried like,
Yeah.
ah.
Right. The-
Because I could see that, it's such a struggle to build your life. And it is so fortunate to find someone to share this journey with. And
yes.
so that, but it perhaps it's circumstances, a little bit like everything. When the right circumstances are there, one can connect.
Yes. Well, you're reminding me now, Mickey Buddha, the meeting in Mickey Buddha, you're going there, right? And the last time we were there was when Nina and Jardel got married there. We participated in their ceremony and it was beautiful, you know. And even for when Janet and I got married. So what we do, and I think what a lot of people do perhaps, is they take parts of the ceremony and they rewrite it a little bit and bring things in different moments. So it's back to that they're not set in stone ceremonies. You can freely interpret them also.
Yes, and
Uh,
there's something very important that I want to add, because it's part of the fact is that you are the one who is committing. You are the one who is saying what you're committing to, because this
right.
freedom, if there is no freedom, there is no sacred, there is no
Yes.
nothing. So
Yeah.
you're saying what you're committing to, what it means to you, what this is, and that is so important. That is what gives the possibility of this emotion to be transmitted.
So, in that regard, I'm going to read a little bit more from your material here. You said in 2008, you talking to CeeLo again, right? You came to the inauguration of the Park of Study and Reflection in Attigliano and officiated a ceremony, applying one of the pillars of the message, free interpretation. You included us in a ceremony tailor-made, in my view, to overcome the excessive European rationalism and cynicism. I call it beneficio because it combines the essence of well-being with the essence of the service. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. This is another of the milestones. But it's funny because even though I was there, it took me 10 years to fall into the meanings, because
Yeah.
that's another thing that happens. You have the experience, but it takes a long time for you to relate things together. So what happens, yeah, in English it doesn't come out well, but the un beneficio is a benefit, and it goes with bienestar and oficio. So what happens is that when Silo came to the inauguration of Attigliano, in that moment, Attigliano was the European park. But this is looking back, because in the moments of despair, when I'm really suffering and I have no way, I can't get out of it, like your images lock in kind of like a vision. I listened to that ceremony because there's the audio, there's no video. And slowly, and what this ceremony does is that it starts by, so you start by connecting with yourself, and you try to relax your mind and your heart and your body, but it does it in a very subtle way. It says, I'm going to try, if I can, as much as I can. And then you connect with the people you love and their difficulties. And there's one sentence which for me is the most difficult and the most important, because it says, I'm not worrying whether or not my good wishes will come true. What I worry is that I can feel them. I can feel how much I want this thing to happen to this person. And in the guided experience of the voyage, the trip, he comes back from this journey and he says, I accept everything, the offense and the warm
Yes,
hug.
right.
And he says, I sing a song to the heart so that it can be reborn thanks to this searched for meaning. And the
Right.
problem is what happens to our hearts. Because when somebody you love is very sick and you can't do anything about it, when you feel that you've been mistreated, or your heart closes, and when your heart closes, you're disconnected from everything. And the fact that something is not rational doesn't allow you to break free of this prison that you end up in. And I think that here, that in Europe, and I think in Europe even more than in the States, in Europe, the people are very enchained to rationality, even though rationality is a very small part of the human conscience, and we can tell just by what people do.
I'm on Team Rational a lot.
Yeah, because that's where we are. And also people are cynical. So not only they only believe in what they can touch, and they think that they believe in only what they can touch, but also they're not really willing to let go of that posture, and they tend to degrade people who do. And so it's very difficult to get out of this formal, let me make believe that I am doing a ceremony, to really have an experience and to be able to connect with something. And I think that Silo, he obviously understood this. So he didn't, nobody knew. And so he caught us unaware. And I remember I was there, and the sensation that I had when I opened my eyes was like, I've just come back from a very, very, I was in another planet, the sensation that you, and I think that he knew what he was doing. And in the conversation he had with the messengers before, that's exactly what he's saying. He's saying, in times, I'm paraphrasing him.
Yeah.
Somebody should go
Yeah.
back and read the notes. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he's saying, when everything falls apart, it's not with ideas that people can connect. People can connect with affection. And so, since we're trying to bring people closer together, this is how we're going to communicate with them. But if you're going to show some affection to someone, first you have to feel it, and then you have to find a way to express it.
Yes. I remember in the inauguration at La Reja, and this made it into the CeeLo movie that Pancho and Anna did. He talks about the cruelty in there,
Yes.
how it's getting crueler every day,
Yes.
and it's on that same theme, I
Yes.
think. You put another little phrase here that I thought was interesting. Here, there is another difficulty to avoid the compulsion to be successful. Doing what is meaningful in itself, not only when I'm certain I can achieve it. Sometimes we can get in cause and effect with the well-being ceremony. I should double down and pray all day and they'll get better, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or since they won't get better, I will disconnect them. And no.
Even worse, right? Yeah. Okay. Next.
So much for that. I know, right? And I
Yeah.
have to say, I was really embarrassed when I saw this inside myself. And I was like, so what? But unfortunately, this is it, this is the landscape. You do what works. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't work, you're not going to do it, even though it's meaningful, even though it's something that is good for you to try it.
Yes. Very good. Well, then I come to the one that I have the worst time of all with, that I want to run out of the room when I hear it, which is the ceremony of recognition. And you say, of all these ceremonies, the recognition ceremony is the most difficult to live in coherence with for me. Could you talk about that a little bit?
So there are two things for me to this ceremony. The first thing, I find embarrassing to say it out loud. There's something that for me is embarrassing.
Yes.
But I realized that that's my problem, because when Silo presented the message in Rome, I was there. And I was there with a friend of mine who knew nothing about Silo or Siloism, nothing. And for me, the ceremony, which has always been the one that I am more comfortable with, has been the well-being. You know, the well-being
Yeah.
for me, since the
Right.
first time I did it, I never doubted, I never looked back. It's the one that I feel more identified with. And the one that I felt more uncomfortable with was the recognition. And so I thought that he wouldn't like it. It was a guy, by the way. And so I thought he wouldn't like it. But actually, that's the one that he liked the best. He felt that he was participating actively in the ceremony. So that was like the first resistance I realized was like, oh, I have a problem. It's not that the ceremony is problematic. And then through the time, after a while, when I became a messenger and I identified with the deepening this aspect of the doctrine, I started realizing that there were parts of the ceremony that I wasn't really carrying out in my life, because there's a part where he says of the sincere respect for other people's, and I would degrade anybody who didn't believe the same things that I did. And I felt righteous while I was doing it. I said, oops, I can't continue doing this. I have to stop. And lots of them. But then at a certain point, we were doing one of the seminars of the message, the one about transformative actions, the golden rule and transformative actions. And there I had an insight which completely changed my relationship with the ceremony, even though I still find it difficult to live coherently with it, although I try, is that this ceremony is the application in all ambits, in all occasions of the golden rule.
Oh, okay.
No, you're
All right.
saying,
Yeah.
I am, consciously and intentionally committing to doing my best to treat others as I would like to be treated in all aspects, with knowledge, with beliefs, with my actions. And so this uniting factor made it easier, because before it was like a checklist. Oh, no, not this one. Oh, this one, yes, this one, yes. So when I said that, it kind of helped me to do one of those passages, the spiral, when you
Yes.
spiral up.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
want to add a last thing, which was also very helpful, that once I was in a park, I was in Manantiales, and we did the ceremony, and the person that I was doing it with, which was my friend Patty, she said something that I thought was so appropriate, because we were doing it during a seasonal meeting where there are people who are messengers or know the message and people who don't. And so she said, the helper says something that those who want to commit stand up. But she added another sentence, which I thought was so pretty. And she said, and those who don't want to commit can accompany us while we commit, So
Oh, yes.
everybody had their
Yes.
place and nobody was
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And I thought,
Yes.
that was really
Yes.
well done.
Yes, because that ceremony can make you feel uncomfortable. And, for me, what happens is everybody gets out of sync when they're reading it, and then it's just like this cacophony of sound, and it's just grating on the ear. That's when I want to run out of the room.
Yes. That's how life is, no? Because there are moments that usually everybody starts together, no?
Yes,
And then
they
they,
do. Then they get off. It's like when you're watching a Netflix movie and the sound's off with the voice, all you can hear is that it's off.
yes.
You lose contact with the content.
But Ken, I was in a ceremony once where I think that the people were so connected that they did it together. And we
Yes.
were many people. So there is the possibility of having this real convergence, even with the breathing and the spacing. But it
Yeah.
only happened once so far.
And I think what you were talking about earlier, it's my judgmental rationality operating on it, that I didn't really give it a chance. I just immediately, I don't like this, but I didn't take the time because certain things just bothered me. Like, what's this good and the bad? What's this all about? The good and the bad and this dialectic. And we are this, but not that. Going
Exactly.
through that.
But the bad, if you look at it, the bad is what separates, is what
Yes.
oppresses, and the
Yeah.
good is what unites. And so I haven't studied it as much as I wanted to because I really like Silo is so wise of how we work. So the ceremonies, they're like kind of like stories. There's an introduction, and then something happens, and then it concentrates, and then it diffuses, and then it synthesizes. And the ceremony of recognition is one of the most complex ones, where you're zooming in and then you're opening. I would really like to examine the different moments of the ceremonies and how they affect, where do they touch you in your emotions, in your thoughts.
Well, I did a little study on that. It bothered me so much that I thought I gotta get to the root of why is he using good, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm just thinking, are you a good boy or a bad boy, Ken? That would be my parents. Have you been a good boy today? So I was grading against that. But I was doing a study on Plato's Republic. It's all there. It's like a lot of this ceremony, you'll find it in Plato's Republic, particularly in the books 6 through 10, which is where you get the allegory of the cave.
Yes.
And sometimes it's called the architecture of reality, this whole thing. And then he talks in the theory of forms, the good is the ultimate form, the form of forms. So it's the highest of all the forms, the ultimate
Yes.
source of truth, knowledge, and reality.
Yes, and also because that's another thing that Silo is so capable of doing, of connecting you to the human process. Now, there's a
Yes,
process
right.
that we belong to, because also I'm not an expert, but part of this of the what is the good knowledge and also the persuasion has to do with the Zarathustra and
Yes,
Zoroaster,
right.
you
Yes,
know?
the same. Yeah, good and evil.
And what
Yeah.
is the good knowledge? So that's also, I think, important. It's not that we're coming out of the blue, we're taking the best of the human intentions and trying to build on top of that.
And in this, always lurking in the background for me is this concept of the hidden city.
Mm,
It's not heaven or the Garden of Eden. It's not a garden. It's not a room you end up in. It's a city,
mm,
which again it comes through in this ceremony is about society and living in the world and being in the world. And you get that in the Republic, this idea of a just city.
yes.
But I think your insight of the golden rule, that is a great way to approach it. In that context, coherence and bad conscience would be incoherence, for example.
Exactly, because if you're saying what we saw before in the inner look, the only way for the conscience to grow is through valid actions. It's not through violence. And so if you're saying, this is it, the meaning, the sacred, the immortal depends upon my capacity of learning to treat others as I would like to be treated, then it can't be like a passing thing. Then you have to commit to it and you have to go back to this every day, I think. Because,
Right.
if not, we have a lot of that people saying things and then doing the exact opposite.
Well, you helped me. So I got to thank you for that, Izzy. You helped me uh, come back to the ceremony of recognition with a new look and a willingness to investigate it more. And all of them, I've got my ceremonies divided into the first half, great. The second half, I'm not even going to look at them. Well, it was your willingness to embrace all of them in your study, not just the ones you like, but you took them all and found a thread running through all of them there that you could work with.
Well, I'm so glad to be able to be useful for your process, because it was thanks to you that I connected with the most important thing that I don't think I wrote about it, although, yes, maybe I did, which is the poetic. All this has to be looked at with poetry, not with a technical thing. And the
Right.
poetry, he says, I don't remember how it's translated in Italy, but in Spanish, I think it's abertura emotiva. You have to open your emotions like
Yes.
when you're faced with poetry. And when I was a teenager, I loved poetry. And then I had poetry totally censored, totally
You did.
forgotten,
Yeah.
totally as something
Yeah.
useless and not me and whatever, until when I met you. I remember you recited a poem by the one Love is a Place, and
Oh,
in that place of love, which is by E. Cummings.
yes.
And that poem, because I forgot, I used to know it by heart, but it talks about love and it talks about yes, which are exactly, for me, the guiding posts of the ceremonies. Is, to face death with a yes and with love, and the death of a loved one and your life and children and, the others. And it was thanks to you. And then you subscribed me to this. I don't know how you can be so permanent, because it's been, what, 10 years.
But I miss a few days now here and there,
Yeah,
the
but see how our processes are entwined. You
yes.
you help me
Yeah.
with something,
Yeah.
I can help you with something else, and the reciprocity is, I
Yeah.
think, also part of the ceremonies, that we're doing this together. And this is what makes everything so life-changing, because if we were on our own, it wouldn't be the same.
No, it would be horrible
Yes.
and lonely. And, you know, I'd like to do the next part in another session, the loneliness and the path and all that. But I'd just like to close this one if I can just read your ending statement here, which I thought was so lovely. I feel I grow when I experience love and compassion. It never happens with violence and resentment. You're talking to Silo again. I can interpret your whole doctrine through this point of view. This point of view unites everything, the love and compassion.
I know, right? But it's so funny, because it's so obvious. Because how can I put this? Before, when I thought about love and compassion, especially because in the attachment to the message, there was this text which talked about love and compassion, because Silo doesn't often mention them in the book of the message, right?
Yeah,
But they were mentioned in this attachment, and also in the ceremonies when he's talking about the sacred and the immortal. He says, for some people, they're affections, but he's never dealing with them directly. But indirectly, what happens is, that is, I believe, that is the very fiber of his teaching, but not as an external empty thing, but as a living experience that can grow. And what really helped me was that before I used to think, okay, this is Isa, no? And there in the distance, far away, is love and compassion. Something that is very far away from me, that I am never going to be able to feel or express, something very big and very far away. And then at a certain point, I kind of like switched the concept, and I said, because I would think, is it true that, the human being grows in love and compassion? And then one day I said, but when do I feel that I grow? When do I feel that I grow? And I realized that the moments that for me are moments of internal growth, or moments of meaning, moments that I want to repeat, are those moments where maybe I didn't experience this incredible love, but yes, they were moved by love and not by resentment or hate. And once I saw that, it was especially, I don't remember if I mentioned this to you when we're talking about the principles, but that is where it made such a big difference in my life, because if we look at the principles and we imagine them in a structure, going against the evolution of things, why would you, if you love yourself, why would you go against why would you not grow if you love yourself? And if you love yourself, why would you force yourself to do things? Why would you do that? You
Yes.
wouldn't.
Right.
And
Right.
and if you take it like that, everything is so much simpler. Of course, it's still difficult to put in practice because we do not live in a world that is built on love. But yes, our best moments, the moments that we want to repeat, the moments that give us light and meaning, are the moments that we experience this. And this, like you were saying, the more we have unifying factors, the easier it is to feel something as a path for the rest of your life. If you can find some threads with Silo, it's a little bit more difficult because his path is a three-dimensional path. So
Yeah.
it's something that when you're in that deep place, you connect with different meanings at the same time. So it can be love, and it can be lucidity, and it can be connection, but they're actually part of something that is like a quilt, that is something that
Yeah.
has unity, even though
Yeah.
it looks
Lovely.
yeah, like a quilt. That's a very sorry, Silo.
It keeps you warm, that's for sure. Well, thank you for your warm-heartedness today, Isa, and your lovely take on the ceremonies, the experience. I know you're leaving for Mickey Buddha soon, I think, in a few days. So we're looking forward to hearing about that when you come back. And perhaps when you come back, we can come on for the last part, which is all about the path. We'd love
Yes.
to do that, I think.
Yes, 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 yes. Perfect. Yes, I would be very happy to. And I will be thinking of all of you in the States, and especially thinking about you guys in Red Bluff, that the hall is coming up so beautifully. And who knows, maybe one of these days we'll go to a messengers meeting in California.
Well, now I'm going to do a shameless self-promotion. We're waiting for you. We wish you were here. So,
Well, I will do my total best to be there. I would love to celebrate this with you.
all right. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Isa. Ciao.
Ciao.